And to discuss more, we are now being joined by Nathan Paul Sutton from Bangkok. He is Operations Director at the Eyewitness Project. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. We understand that President Donald Trump first said that there was nothing left to hate in Iran, but now he says that the US is not finished with Iran just yet. Now, with there still being a dense fog around his objectives, how long do you think this conflict could drag on from here on?
I think the conflict is going to drag on a lot longer than President Trump wants it to. His tactic has been this shock and awe of large-scale military strikes on Iran, with the hope that leads to the fall of the leadership, possibly an uprising in the country, and then an Iranian regime that is more willing to come back to the negotiating table and agree something that's favourable to Trump. However, Iran's strategy here is likely more a war of attrition, where they can slowly play this conflict out. Well, Trump has said that the last few days has seen a decrease in Iranian strikes. That doesn't mean that Iranian capability is actually decreasing. While the US continues to destroy the Iranian Navy and Air Force, they have not been able to stop the production and use of Iranian drones. And those drones are enough to continue to fly into neighboring countries across the region and ensure that the oil supply is being disrupted. Those drones are enough to ensure that the tourism industry across the Middle East is being disrupted and that the airspace will remain closed across that region. And on top of that, Iran will ensure that no freights can move for the Strait of Hormuz, which completely impacts global oil supply. So Iran is not looking to win a conflict with the US. It is looking to make a statement that it is able to continue fighting, and actually the global economic impact of Iran's ability to combat the US and Israel here is going to be enough that eventually the US may have to reconsider what they're doing.
Right, we hear you, Nathan. And now, of course, the Strait of Hormuz has become a major flashpoint, and the International Energy Agency is preparing its largest ever oil reserve. And this is about 400 million barrels of release to offset these supply disruptions. But we understand that this kind of an intervention isn't something that could be repeated often. And with oil prices climbing, could the economic pressure perhaps push Washington to scale back or rethink its campaign against Iran?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is the hope of Iran, that their impact on oil supply, oil prices, and access to oil across the world will be enough to create some kind of pressure point for the US and Israel to change their minds about this conflict. But I mean, that 400 million barrels of oil may sound like a lot, but it roughly works out to about 3 days of global oil supply. And that oil supply still needs to make its way around the world from the various access points that it's in. So the world is in a very precarious situation here. The entire global economy is dependent on this conflict ending as soon as possible. You have countries as far away as Japan, who rely on the Strait of Hormuz for about 70% of their oil supply. So you have a risk of turning this into a global conflict, not because states want to align themselves with the US and Israel or indeed Iran, because they are in desperate need of access to oil. Now, whether or not that'll actually mean that the US and Israel will be swayed into ending this war earlier is a bigger question, because you're dealing with Bibi Netanyahu and Donald Trump, who don't tend to listen to logic. So the pressure globally will either be for the US and Israel to cease these strikes in the Middle East, to allow the global economy to begin to rebuild and oil supply to start to flow once more. But at the same time, many of these states that will be applying that pressure could end up becoming involved more militarily as a priority, as a necessity, as they need desperate access to oil.
Of course, and while we understand that there is no clear off-ramp in sight as of yet, at least not in the short term, we know that now Iran has laid down its 3 conditions to peace, and it has said that, of course, it wants the recognition of Iran's legitimate rights, reparations, and also guarantees of no future aggression. How likely do you think Washington would be willing to accommodate it? Because we understand that even before the attack, the Iranian side was making concessions and while it was negotiating, and the same pattern carried out earlier in June as well.
Yeah, the Iranian side was already making concessions, and the US was making very few. It is very unlikely, going by the strong rhetoric and the all-out war that's been launched by the US and Israel here, that they would be willing to concede anything whatsoever at the negotiating table. But the new leader in Iran, who was injured in the same strikes that killed his father, is clearly not willing to concede any points here either. So you have two sides that are very unwilling to ease the narrative, to ease the warmongering rhetoric, or to stop strikes and military action across the region. It is increasingly dangerous how much all of the leaders involved here are absolutely doubling down on their rhetoric rather than trying now to find any way to ease tensions.
But right, having said that, despite the deep mistrust that both of the sides have in each other, do you think there would be a point, let's say in the longer term, where Iran would have to come back to the negotiating table and sit down with the United States to perhaps lay down what it is required to reach a logical conclusion here?
Logically, then yes, both sides would want to try to find a way to sit down and do this. But the current regimes in all three of these countries, of Israel, Iran and the USA, none of those regimes right now could see to any form of point. The issue in Iran is we don't know how long that leadership will actually remain in place. Trump's and Netanyahu's best hope is to get rid of this latest leader and hope that the next leader may be more sympathetic towards the US and towards Israel and towards even ceding some kind of points in a negotiation system. But as it stands with who is in charge right now, there is no off-ramp for this conflict.
We hear you, Nathan, and of course this is an evolving situation and we'll still have to wait and see how it evolves further. But for now, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you.